Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
You're welcome along to Monday Night Rugby. So Leinster will look to become the first side to win 3 successive Pro 14 titles when they take on Ulster in next weekend's final in Dublin. Leinster a relatively straightforward 13-3 win over a pretty underwhelming Munster on Friday night. And then Ian Madigan, the hero for Ulster on Saturday against Edinburgh. Madigan with a sideline conversion to level the game and then a monster penalty to win it with the last kick of the match. Lots to look forward to next week, but plenty to reflect on as well with Keith Wood and Liam Toland. Evening, gentlemen.
Hi, Nathan.
Liam, I might start with you because you were one of the lucky ones to be at the Aviva Stadium on Friday night, or not maybe the case for Munster men. 5 semi-final defeats in a row now for Munster. Almost a decade since they last won a trophy. This defeat, it seems, has sparked quite a bit of soul-searching among Munster supporters over the weekend as to where the province is going under Johan van Graan. When you look back in the 80 minutes, did Munster ever have a game plan that was going to trouble Leinster?
Well, I suppose, as you say, Nathan, I am one of the lucky ones that was at the game. And I suppose my ambition when I go to a game, if I'm working at it, is to try and, in that moment, understand why are things happening. Why are Munster getting into the opposition's 22, Leinster in this case, and really struggling to convert field position to scores. But in order to kind of get answers to that, you also have to look at what Leinster were doing. And then in the broader picture, to answer your question, you have to look back and try and unpack maybe the last 10 years. Why have Leinster dominated this fixture for the last 10 years? And then going back to the previous 10 years and go, well, in Munster's turn, what is it about Munster in the noughties that made them so successful? So when I'm sitting there watching the match, I'm trying to unpack all of that and trying to figure out why. And of course, there's a lot in that. But one of the things I was saying before the match, Nathan, was the centre of gravity, Munster's centre of gravity. When you look at when they were at their best back in the noughties, it was a violence. It was brilliant rugby players for a start, but who imposed their game, the front five led by the likes of Paul O'Connell, Donnacha Callan et al. And prior to that, the likes of Woody and Peter Clohessy and all that. They imposed a game plan on. And I think one of the challenges Munster showed at the weekend was gripping on to this centre of gravity when they don't have the front five to impose. So the second row pairing that Munster started off with on Friday, like Ty Byrne is a phenomenal player, but is he a workhorse second row? And Billy Holland has been a huge servant to Munster, but are either of them going to, in the absence of Sneeman and Klein, etc.? And then you look at it in the why, and I'd say, I thought Johnny Sexton's performance in the second quarter of the half was absolutely immense. And I'm sure there's lots of people watching, listening to me going, what was so special about it? Well, the Leinster team I would have been involved in that moment would have tried to play rugby to beat Munster, and maybe in the conditions would have fallen apart. But the Leinster team of 2020 doesn't have to play particularly well. They have unbelievable rugby knowledge throughout the squad. They have unbelievable leadership in the likes of Sexton, and he knew exactly. You could almost feel it. We're going to win this game, as in Leinster. We're going to win this game by 1 point. And we're just going to soak up whatever Munster have, which isn't a lot. And that was quite evident after 5 minutes. And then we're going to be patient. We're going to get into the opposition. Munster's 22. And when we're there, we're going to take scores. And they dictated the tempo, which was unbelievable. As soon as Munster had a bright purple patch, Leinster just took all the tempo out of it. And when they decided they could do an off-the-top line-out through Devon Toner and they could get their midfield into play. So I think the centre of gravity for Munster is dead and gone. I think with the players that they have to completely review what they're doing. They've a midfield that are monsters that almost never get the ball. Alande and Chris Farrell, I can't recall him touching the ball really in the whole game. And they've got 2 wingers and a full back that are more than capable of playing in any team, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere. And they're just not getting the opportunity in the ball. So they really need to rethink their centre of gravity. In the meantime, Leinster have the ability in those conditions to dog it out. And when they wanted the subtleness, and I think of the first game, 10 days ago, when James Lowe scored a try, Sexton did a choke tackle, they went to a scrum, they ultimately went on the blind side. It was a 3-on-2 and they converted it and looked simple. But of course it's not simple. It's quality rugby, quality skills and quality rugby knowledge. And in there is the answer to your question, Nathan.
Yeah, and a good answer as well, Liam. And Keith, we could talk about this for an hour and we'll probably come to the ultimate answer as that Leinster are just too good right now, that they just have too much depth of talent for Munster to be able to get with them. But Munster can't look at it like that. And the worrying thing is the way Liam's talking there, it's almost like they need to start a rebuilding period. But that rebuilding period started 2 years ago. Simon Lewis has quotes today in the Examiner from Johan van Graan where he says, obviously we want to improve our skill set first. We want to build our squad. And the most important thing, if you look at it, we've got to play home semi-finals. And that was from 2 years ago. And everything he said 2 years ago when they were beaten by Leinster stands today. It feels like that the last 2 years of transition, that there's no end point to it at the moment. Are you seeing signs of progress?
I thought we saw signs of progress a couple of weeks ago, and then we lost that progress pretty quickly. An awful lot that seemed to happen on Friday was poor almost. It was the idea that not a huge amount was going on. Let's kick the ball up into the air and see exactly what happens, and see how we function from there. I don't know if you were to go and ask and say, could you give a determination of what the philosophy is, how Munster play rugby? I think you'd struggle after watching that game on Saturday. Maybe you wouldn't struggle. Maybe you just say their idea is to kick the ball up into the air.
That's pretty damning over 2 years into Van Graan's reign. That still, there's no overriding philosophy that you can point your finger at.
Well, I think it's damning on Friday. And it wasn't damning for a lot of the season. And I think what Munster will say was they got themselves into a position to score. They didn't kick their points. That would have put it to 10-9 or 11-9. And whatever circumstances could happen then at the end. For me, that just isn't ambitious enough. And so I looked at the game and roared. My voice is actually still a little bit hoarse. Roared at the machine, roared at the television, partly to shut up Toland, but actually partly to just with the idea of there has to be more to it. And I understand a kicking philosophy, of course I do. And actually, Leinster kicked us, I think, nearly the same amount of times as Munster. Leinster kicked it with a view of placing people onto the field or putting it into the corner or maybe getting it back. I know Munster were kicking to try and get it back. They just didn't get it back. And in that instance, you have to use the tools that you have available. And look, I've said this time and time again. I love the ambition to try and get RG Snyman over and Dialende over. I think that's a very important thing. But then you have to use them. And you have to use them in a position where they go for a Big 12. What would you want to do? You want to crash into the 10, but you want to do it on your terms, on the gain line, going like a train. And we haven't seen that in 2 weeks with them. And for that, I think Munster missed a trick. And for all the things that Liam has said about what Munster have done in the past or don't do in the past, this is in the present at the moment. And that, for a standard, when you're looking at a semi-final, you would say that Munster didn't really fire a shot. And maybe that's what they think they have to do in this instance. But it made for really, really hard viewing. It really did.
I want to play a clip from this morning's OTB AM, which is with thanks to Gillette, made of what matters. Alan Quinlan was given his thoughts on the performance.
Well, they do have an attacking plan, and you saw it in the first game, the way they played. I thought their approach in that first Leinster game was brilliant. And I give you one prime example. The first try that Andrew Conway scored in that match, Munster were picking and jamming at the line. Normally, they just keep doing that until they get the score, or else they turn it over or knock it on. But they identified the opportunity to move it quickly and look for the space. So I think their approach and their ambition to change is definitely there. Of course, Johan van Graan has got to take ownership of that, because when you lose these games and you lose them in that manner, he's got to take control of that and take responsibility. So is Stephen Larkin. Where was Stephen Larkin's imprint in that? If I was the backs coach and I had Dialende, Farrell, Conway and Earls, I'd be trying to put pressure on the forwards coach or the forwards pack to deliver me good ball. I want my back line to get the ball in the hands, get some space on it. Too often, it's particularly the other night, the ball was coming out way too slow. no matter who you have in the centres or who you have, you've no time and space, and you got to get the ball in Diolinda's hands earlier. You got to give him a little bit of space. Chris Farrell, and they showed that in the first game. They showed they could do it. So I think the players, in a sense, of course, if Munster score and they're the ones ahead, like I said, you can kick the ball all day long, but their kick chase wasn't good enough. Their accuracy wasn't good enough, and they've got to change that in the field, particularly when you're 10 points down. You've got to say, right, let's do something different. Let's just throw caution to the wind. Let's try and offload the ball. Let's just throw the ball wide. And they don't seem to be able to make those kind of decisions on the field. So leadership and vision of space is a problem. And too many players not making carries, not fronting up. Like I said, 17 metres for the forward pack. They've got to take ownership of that this morning, or when they look back in the video and say, well, where are the carries? Where are the hard yards?
Alan Quinlan there in this morning's OTB AM. You can get that full piece on the OTB Podcast Network. You made a lot of interesting points, Liam. That one about trying something different when you're 10 points down and you're in the closing stages, and maybe a lack of leadership at times, and in-game management, when things aren't working. It's very surprising when you look at that 15 from Munster on the pitch, that they wouldn't have those players who would stand up and realise that maybe if the message isn't coming from the sideline, would take it upon themselves to say, as Alan said, let's do something different. Why didn't that happen?
Well, I think that's an oversimplistic way of framing how you go from plan A to plan B. There was a sense of almost desperation about that commentary there. It's like, we're under pressure, we need to throw caution to the wind. I don't think when you're in a field sport, it's ultimately the same. You create space, you exploit space. So the question is, where can Munster create the space? Now, that's why I'm particularly interested in the centre of gravity, because I think their centre of gravity has changed. They no longer can create the space. They can in the Guinness Pro early stages of the competition, but when they come up against the Barcelonas and the Real Madrids at the semi-final stages, they don't have the horses to be able to create that space. So they have to have a different system in play. And it's way too late, 20 minutes into a game, in the conditions that they were playing at the weekend, because it was very greasy, to come along with what's our plan B. So I think there's a cultural change that's needed around how they, like, when Conor Murray went off, Craig Casey, who's a very exciting, energetic young scrum half, I think the very first thing he did was box kicked it. So that's a cultural thing. That's not throwing caution. That's embedded in what they're doing. And that's what's, like, there was lots of little vignettes in there when Leinster were in the opposition in Munster's 22. There was one little piece I spotted where I think it was Caelan Doris ran a decoy line off scrum half. Cian Healy went round, the ball was passed behind Doris's back, and Keely crashed into a weak shoulder and gained the gain line and maybe a couple of metres. Like, that's the simplicity of what Leinster are doing. There's no caution in that. It's still a one-out pass, but there's a subtlety in the difference from a defensive point of view. So I would think one of the things that, having watched Munster even the last couple of weeks, is how rarely they make a difficult defensive decision for Leinster. So a classic example would be CJ Stander, who has been immense, certainly in last week's game, the turnovers, etc. he was gaining. But the couple of big key mark ball carries he had, he ran straight at Sexton, which you compliment him. But there was a difficult physical challenge, but there was no decision for Sexton to make. He just had to stand his ground and make the tackle. And they're the subtle differences that Leinster are doing. And like, Caelan Doris, for me, went about his business brilliantly. Like, he's kind of an under-the-radar player, yet his rugby knowledge and the culture of what his team are doing just fits in and makes a massive contribution, whether he's on the ball or not. So I think that part of what Alan is saying is, what's the plan B? Well, when you look at sort of the Munster halfback, you look at, say, JJ Hanrahan, who I think is, when the tempo is high, when he's very little time to think, he gets on the ball and he was at his best with Chris Farrell and all that in the first game. When the game slows down, that's where the rugby intelligence of the whole group isn't coming to the fore. In other words, if you are box kicking, instead of Conor Murray setting up an elongated snake ruck and then spending 30 seconds setting it up and then kicking it, why not create a bit of tempo, give it to CJ Stander, have a quick ruck, give it to someone else, have another quick ruck, and then box kick it really quickly when the Leinster defence don't really know what's happening. And it was also stale, and so you could sit in the stand. I was infuriated. I was exhausted at the end of the game, just trying to figure out, why are Munster doing this to themselves? They're playing into Leinster's hands. So I say the plan B bit, is a much deeper question that cannot be answered 20 minutes into a fixture. It has to be in preparation for seasons after seasons. Like the likes of Woody was a top-class international player who could play a variety of styles. He could, like, obviously Munster are lacking top-class international players at the time, but the ability, I'm sure, Woody, being able to flick in and out and look at your teammates who understood how to flick in and out of various styles, that takes seasons to develop.
I think it does, but I also think that certain things have to change and certain things have to be set up to change. And for me, JJ was too deep for the whole day, which never meant he was much of an option. So not only was the kick being telegraphed with the snake, but it just didn't look like there was another option actually going. And when he went into full back, Rory Scannell came on, and Rory Scannell didn't pass the ball once. Now, he's an out half who didn't pass the ball. He took it into contact a load of different times or kicked it. And he's not a pure natural or out half. He is fitting a hole. Munster are suffering really heavily from Joey Carberry not being there, because he was the guy to help run the game. And if we're honest, there is a drop down then in quality that comes afterwards. And also there's a couple of young guys that are sitting that weren't on the squad that have played well at under 20 level, that have shown a bit of spark about them, that are 10s, that may not be the finished ideal, and it may be a big punt to put them in. But at some stage you have to show more ambition than was shown. That's the part that's frightening. And I know you're in the game to get the win at the end of it. Leinster, even though Leinster didn't play particularly well by their standards in offence, they took their chances when they had them. They played, I thought, a very smart, albeit boring game, and they don't get any criticism for it because they won, right? So to play that style, you have to win at the end of it and then move on to the next game. And unfortunately for Munster, that when they've got to semi-finals over the last couple of years, when that big pressure's come on, you're playing against serious quality. And when they do, they don't seem to... It's not only do they not have the skills to unpick it, but they didn't seem to look at any other skills from that one. So for me, it's just incredibly frustrating, like really frustrating to watch. And like it wasn't a good game of rugby, and the better team won, absolutely. So there's no criticism. You mentioned Caelan Doris. I thought that was his most complete game that I've seen him play. He cropped up everywhere, wherever it was necessary. I thought Will Connors did a phenomenal job. And as a destructive tackling 7, he's almost without peer, with very little fuss. Johnny played pretty well. Ringrose, for me, has been just intelligence-wise kind of above everybody else for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I thought Henshaw played well. I thought Henshaw gave the exemplar of how to take a ball into contact as a centre to get over the gain line midway through the second half, I think. And it was just a really hard line with Johnny up short, pulled it back. You get over the gain line. You have to get over the gain line, and Munster didn't get over the gain line at any stage. And you've talked about some of the players of the past, and I don't think that that's a help for anybody, but I would say within the balance of it, I still would have gone on this day of days, I still would have tried to have gone with youth a little bit more, because you need energy and you need some calm heads at the very end. So I may have made a bit of a change. But Munster, the injuries that Munster have had has made them suffer heavily. They don't have the strength of depth within the squad that Leinster have, and it paid. But there was also, for me, a lack of ambition.
And just on that,
sorry, can I just jump in there? If you take, say, someone like Jack O'Donoghue, who's like, he's 2 caps for Ireland. He's pretty much physically similar to Caelan Doris. Super player, real classic Munster abrasive back rower. And Caelan Doris obviously comes from Mayo, and Jack O'Donoghue comes from Waterford. But if you sliding doors them, if you swap them a few seasons ago, I know there's a 4-year age gap between them, but the cultural expectation of a Leinster player now is to be able, and you can see it in Bard, the sub-second row, it's not just that you win line-outs and counter-ruck and do all that, which he does. There's an expectation, there's a rugby intelligence that when you're on the pitch, you have to contribute both offensively and defensively. And for me, that's the cultural shift that needs to happen. And it needs to happen much earlier in the journey. Like, I'm sitting here in Limerick. There's no end to the amount of sporting talent in this city. So what is encouraging that sporting ability over time? So when they get to play at a professional level, that these players, our top-class players, are comfortable like the Leinster players are comfortable in playing rugby. So the ball is not the enemy, the ball is a friend.
Keith, just before we finish up talking about Munster, to go back to your point about a lack of ambition, a lot of the conversation's been around Stephen Larkin's influence and whether he has had enough of an influence or been allowed enough of an influence to make Leinster or to make Munster that creative force. Have you seen that? Have you seen his influence come to the fore since he's arrived, or would there still be question marks and maybe a battle of wills between himself and the head coach?
Yeah, I don't think that we need to be stirring up discontent, whether there is or isn't. You know, I don't think that's the case, that there may be a battle of wills. I do think you have to say that you want more out of a team. And I thought we saw more 2 weeks ago. It was a great game 2 weeks ago. Friday was a turgid affair, really. But it was a great game. So we did see some stuff. And when there was an opportunity, there were tries scored. And yes, there was a guy in the sin bin for some of that. But that's part of it. You take whatever opportunities arrive up. But I see some changes, but I think we need to see them faster. And I don't think Munster can take the view that we have to wait for a new signing for those things to happen. We need to use the players we have at our disposal, and this time more than any other, where in many cases I think the future of the sport is kind of dangling a little bit, because the economies of sport are quite frightening at the moment, and you need to use the players at your disposal. There are plenty of young guys. They may not be ready, they may not be perfect, but they need to get a chance and an opportunity to see them. Otherwise, you'll never see them in big games. So you're going to have to play them at some stage. So, look, I don't know whether all the players view things differently or don't view them differently, or whether there's an issue between the coaches. What I do know is that that style of play isn't really good enough at all.
There's only 4 weeks, Liam, till Munster will be back out again for the start of the new season, and there's no real clarity around Joey Carbery and how long he's going to be out for. Could even end up missing all of next season if you're to go by some of the reports in the papers. So it looks as though JJ Hanrahan will be the main man again, unless they decide to go with real youth at times next season, and maybe they'll have no choice. The couple of kicks he missed, Johan van Graan said they were at a crucial moment. In terms of his confidence levels and working with Stephen Larkin, do Munster still just need to put their full trust in Hanrahan? Do they have any other choice? Or actually do you see maybe one of the younger kids in Munster having to get a bit more game time next season?
Well, the last thing any organisation needs is that their quarterback is in doubt. So I think JJ Hanrahan needs time. That said, if you were picking an Irish out half today and you listed them, you would certainly, JJ would be back in the pool. Like you'd have Sexton would be number one, you'd have a fit Carbery maybe, you'd have a Ross Byrne, you'd have an Ian Madigan now after the weekend. He's more than earned.
And he's 28 now, JJ Hanrahan, so he's not a kid anymore.
So he's back in 5th or 6th or 7th place in a sense. And like, it's such a pity for him, because again, as I was watching the game, you really wanted him, a player like him, you really want for him to kind of build on the previous game. And I just think that he's really at his best when he has almost no time to think. It's all instinctive stuff. But the problem in Northern Hemisphere rugby is, like, you play in the rain, you play in the muck, you don't have everything going your way. You don't have a front five that are dominating. So you have to be able to manage that. And the reflection of how Johnny Sexton managed it without playing particularly brilliantly was just immense. So it's a really difficult one for them, but I think the last thing they need is to start chopping and changing it out half. Really it is. But they have a chance to regroup. And they need to be able, like with Andrew Conway, Keith Earls and the midfield that they got some serious resources, and they need to be using that as they drift away from the old style game into something that's more comfortable to what they want for the future. Whether JJ is the answer to that remains to be seen.
Where to start with Leinster, Keith? 24 straight victories, weren't at their best, but like Sexton's performance, you're both saying not at his very best, maybe didn't need to be, but his ability to know again when to kick behind, to to just suffocate a team. Leinster have that. They know how to win these games. And right now, it's hard to see them losing a game between now and the end of the season.
I always think you can see a team losing a game. What I liked about Leinster on Friday, which is a Munster fan, it's horrible on that particular day, was that they had us under pressure all over the field. So things that were slightly out of kilter 2 weeks ago weren't. But there was a pressure all the time. At every facet of play, there was pressure. So when it becomes very difficult when you're comparing like with like and players with players, because like saying Caelan Doris and Jack O'Donoghue, I'd say if you swap those players, Jack O'Donoghue would have a far more comfortable afternoon of it playing behind a team that was even though they weren't in the lead for a big chunk of the first half, they were in control of an awful lot of that game without trying too hard. They weren't making errors. They weren't trying to do a huge amount. They were playing chess and doing it really well. Same as Johnny. Johnny had the ball and a more attacking mindset, was running onto it a little bit more. They didn't do it very often, but when they did do it, there was a lot going on. It wasn't simple. It wasn't one out ball. There was an awful lot of moving parts for it, and Johnny. It's the difference between Johnny and JJ. One of the differences, but Johnny is an accomplished international who's been playing the game at a high level for a long time, and he knows the game very well, and he was comfortable. But so was everybody else on the Leinster team. And I felt Munster were under pressure for a huge amount of it. And I will say they were in a position to be in the game, but they weren't comfortable at any stage within that, whereas Leinster looked to be comfortable for a huge amount of it. So, look, I thought it was incredibly impressive. I do love the idea that a team like Leinster, who they do kick a fair amount of ball, but they run a lot of ball, they have a lot of ambition. They have a lot of hands on the ball, a lot of tip-ons, a lot of different running angles. They try and incorporate their players an awful lot more. Their wingers come in off the wing a lot. They have ambition, but they can mix it up with a kind of tough boot and bollock sort of game as we had on Friday and still come out the right side of a victory. Like we keep talking about times in the past, if you go back 20 years, Leinster couldn't do that, but they can do it now. And it's something you have to look at it and say, it is pretty fantastic. So I wouldn't imagine that they'll play even vaguely like that in the semi-final, or in the final next week, in the semi-final afterwards. I just don't think they will. I think they will have a different game depending on the players that they put on the field and the team that they're playing against.
Liam, have you got a preferred back row for Leinster? You see Doris and Connors there. Josh van der Fleer only comes on for 5 minutes. Do you have a preferred back row? Does Leo Cullen have a preferred back row? Are you happy with whoever you roll out on a Friday, Saturday night?
Well, as I said before the match, I'd love to be flying the wall when he whittles these 600 players down to 23, and then even better how he explains to Josh van der Fleer that he's not starting. But then you have to throw in Dan Levy as well. So we can contrast and compare in many ways. Like there's more rugby schools in essence in Leinster and Leicester. There's more of a talent group. There's a bigger population, all that sort of stuff. But to pick up on what Keith is saying, the transition, the learning curve is a bit like Dublin Gaelic football. You need to learn how to win matches. Once Leinster or Dublin could do that, then the juggernaut will take over. I just think the rugby intelligence of those back rows, like Dan Levy, Josh van der Fleer, Caelan Doris, who's relatively young. There's other back rowers floating through. Jack Conagher would, I suppose, a relatively quiet game. Will Connors was picked purely to target the Munster centre of gravity and did brilliantly in it. So you could really, in terms of rugby intelligence, you could pick any one of them. All of them have subtle strengths that are different from the other players, but I think all of them can play. And I think that's, from a Leo Cullen point of view and his entire management team, I think that's the most important message of the story of the weekend, was the rugby intelligence of the entire organisation is superior to pretty much every rugby club in the Northern Hemisphere. And, there's only a few clubs could compete with it, and Munster struggled. So I'd pick any of the back row, any one of them, and they seem to be absolutely hungry. I'd say they're killing each other to get to game, and that type of competition in that culture is hugely significant.
if the final is anything like last year's Champions Cup quarter-final, where Ulster probably should have beaten Leinster, it'll be an absolutely brilliant game, Keith. And what a moment for Ian Madigan. You were on a few weeks ago saying, forget about the green jersey for now, concentrate on getting that Ulster jersey. He couldn't have done much more in those 10 minutes or so he was on the pitch.
No, he looked like I still want him to take the ball flatter, actually, when he's in open play. I just think it interests more people. He's a beautiful pass, but he tends to do it a little bit behind the gain line, and I just think that puts other teams under pressure if he takes it a bit flatter. But he's a small guy, he's going to get smashed for it, but he's going to have to do that. But it was nothing about that. For him, he walks on cold to kick a touchline conversion, and it didn't look for a second like it was going anywhere else. And when the opportunity arose, I said that's really on the outside of his limit, and he hoofed it. I mean, and it just made it. It was on the outside of his limit, but he didn't lose his technique. And so sometimes when you are at the edge, I think there was a lot of adrenaline in that one, and adrenaline can work against you as it can work with you. You know, it can put you a bit jittery, you can get a bit tight on it, and he wasn't. He stuck with his technique and banged it over the bar. And look, these are guys that. And look, Madigan's a guy that didn't get he got a run. He's played plenty of times for Ireland, but he was always number 2. He didn't get the chance. He went away to be number 1. That hasn't really worked for him, on both in France and in Bristol. Now he's back again. He is young enough and old enough to know that he has to take pretty much every single opportunity that he gets. But that's much easier said than done. I mean, you have to be happy for him. You have to be cheering him on for that idea that this is it. This is the first real opportunity he has to thank the people that have given him a new contract, to say, yeah, I'm here and I can do the job for you. So, but it was fairy tale stuff. Ulster were nowhere near that game for most of the game. They really weren't. A couple of good changes. Stockdale moving back off onto the wing. Made a bit of a change in the second half. Marcel Coetzee is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Ailby Mathewson just shows you pure 9, fast. I mean, he's a miss in Munster, he really is. He was loved down there because he had a different energy for it, but he changed the tempo unbelievably when he came on. And at the end of it, you know, you're trying to say that Ulster can't really win this, but they ultimately deserved it.
Can they win at the weekend, Liam?
Of course they can win, but I'm not so sure how good Edinburgh were either in terms of the top 4. Like, that's the problem with the Guinness Pro. You've only 2 or 3 real European standard sides, and I'm not so sure Edinburgh are quite there just yet. So I'm delighted for everything that Keith said. I totally hear it. And I was at Ailby Mathewson. Anytime I've been commentating at games when he was playing for Munster, not only does he have an energy and a zip and an impatience with his teammates, I love how his teammates react to him when he came on the pitch. So their expectation is they got to switch on and keep up with him. And that just sets, like, when he comes, it's a hugely significant impact sub to have a quality player like that as well. So can they win? Of course they can. I'm not so sure, though, they're at that level just yet. But for Ian Madigan, it was wonderful to see. It was absolutely, like, I was thinking of that line in The Departed where someone said, who are you? And I can't remember the actress says, I'm the guy who does his job. You must be the other guy. And I thought of that. Like, who are you, Ian Madigan? I'm the guy who kicks the points. You must be the other guy. So it was fantastic for him.
Just before we let you go, a brief word on Owen Farrell. Any way that he escapes and can play against Leinster in a couple of weeks' time? Keith, you're shaking your head.
No way. I presume for that it was he got his timing entirely wrong. It's a swinging arm. There's the tiny mitigation of the duck of the head, but that's no real mitigation. You need to have more control on that. I'd say it's a 4 to 6 week sort of thing. So that's what it looks like to me anyway. And I mean, he's come out today and he's apologised, and he apologised at the time. But I think he's in for a bit of a ban.
Yeah, Liam, in some ways similar maybe to Novak Djokovic, and a moment of stupidity that he's done quite a few times before, but finally it's caught up with him.
But I suppose the referee's role in any sport is to change the behaviour of the players. And if all the players are elite, world-class players, Owen Farrell is one of them, but his behaviour has to change. And it's been on the verge for some time. And I don't think that this is a good way to change the behaviour. His coaches certainly have abdicated responsibility in changing his style of tackle. Maybe this will change it. But kids who watch him need to understand that style of tackle, which has been pretty much there all along, you can't have under 12s mimicking that, and that's what they do. So in many ways, I hope a good thing comes out of this.
All right, Keith, Liam, great stuff as always.
Cheers, gents.
If you missed any of our rugby coverage, the best thing to do is get onto the OTB Sports app and subscribe. You'll get Monday Night Rugby, Wednesday Night Rugby, Brian O'Driscoll and all of that good stuff.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.